It's interesting how life works. For a long time when I was younger, I have struggled with what I wanted to do when I grew up. I studied a science degree and I was ready for everything that it entailed, but deep down I always knew that it was not meant to be.
And now that I'm traveling around Australia, I see it clearly. Apparently, I just needed to come to the other side of the world to fully discover my passion. Kind of funny, right?
For some years now, I have been devoting my time to projects that aim for the conservation of the environment, but it hasn't been until the vital experience of traveling to Australia that I realized what I truly yearn for: filmmaking.
This documentary tells the story of the inhabiting wildlife in a subtropical region in the east coast of Australia, Byron Bay. The reason why Byron Bay is so attractive to so many people is because it's a blend between nature and humans.
In many places, the city development is all that matters and nature disappears, but here is special. Here, with some conservation programs, the local community is trying to protect the wildlife of the national parks that surround this little town. Not only Cape Byron and the adjacent beaches are national parks, but also in the hinterland of Byronshire there are ancient rainforests, and offshore there is a big marine park where the species are looked after as well. And when nature blends with a human society, the result is an incredible, healthy and vibrant place to live in.
The idea of producing my first documentary came when I met David Worth. David is an Englishman who 20 years ago fell in love with Byron Bay and its local fauna and flora. He's a wildlife filmmaker who has spent more than a decade documenting the native species of Australia. With his knowledge and advice, he's going to help me find some of those animals and learn about their behaviors and habitats. After spending 3 months exploring the beautiful environment of the wild and tropical Byron, here is the final outcome.
My name's David Worth and I'm making a wildlife documentary in this area. We're going to be filming along the coast and into the wetlands and all around the area here into this literal rainforest which is right behind us, and we're going to be looking at all these creatures and how they actually live and how they work together and how all those ecosystems work together to produce a complete marine coastal ecosystem.
This journey begins on the rocky headland of Cape Byron. With a great scenery to the Pacific Ocean, one of the first animals that I spot was the Indo-Pacific bottlenose dolphin.
Byron Bay is home to over 1,000 bottlenose dolphins. We're up on the headland of Cape Byron, and this is a great place to see dolphins moving back and forth. You quite often see a lot of behaviour when they're actually moving around. It's a very interesting place. You get like an aerial view from here, and very good for filming them, especially when the water's clear like it is today.
One of the things I was most keen on filming was the animal behavior, and the Indo-Pacific bottlenose dolphin has a very interesting one. It is known that the communities of dolphins in these shallow waters are mainly formed by females and their offspring. As males can be quite harsh on females sometimes, these matriarchal groups live in these sea waters to avoid male aggression, and actually, when the ocean was calm, it was amazing to see the young coming up to the surface next to their mothers. When it comes to mating, males can have possessive strategies where they escort the females with the help of 2 or 3 other male dolphins. It is quite well known that aggressions toward that escorted females may occur from potential rivals within the pod. In that situations, it can be seen how several males start to swim to a female, making her jump out of the water in a supine position. But they have a tender side as well. Sometimes I saw how a couple swam friendly together and put themselves in front of each other, belly to belly, to end up mating afterwards. They are also considered quite good surfers, When the good waves came through, one of my favorite moments to film was them swimming through the water walls. After spending uncountable days roaming around the headlands of Cape Byron, now I can tell that it is where a big part of the wildlife action happens. I vividly remember when far in the distance between bushes I saw a brown shape that started to jump. It was a swamp wallaby, and it was the first time that I saw one.
The whole area around Byron Bay is very swampy. In these swamps, there's quite a large population of swamp wallabies, and they're an interesting creature as well. Generally nocturnal, you can see them early in the morning as well, and they even get out onto the cliffs at Cape Byron, and they're remarkably sure-footed. Galloping around on the cliffs there, you would never think that they'd be able to do it. They're very steep inclines and very rocky and very crumbly, and they still seem to be very much at home.
One of the things that captivated me the most was their feeding habits. Although you can see them eating from the grasslands, they usually forage on the bush vegetation. This is because of their particular tooth structure. It is known that the shape of the molars of swamp wallabies, unlike other marsupials, allows them to break up the hard parts of plants like the scrubs. Other fascinating creatures that I daily spotted from up there were the raptors. The best moment of the day to film them was when the sun was going down. With that last orange rays of sunlight, the flying silhouettes were attracting all the looks. We have several species of predatory birds, the raptors, that actually live around Byron Bay and hunt and fish. We have the white-bellied sea eagle, the Brahminy kite, and we have ospreys as well. An interesting thing about the white-bellied sea eagle is that it's a monogamous bird, which means that a female and a male will pair for life, and when one of them dies, the surviving bird will quickly seek for a new mate. It is normally seen perched high on a tree or gliding over waterways and adjacent land. It's an eagle that hunts mainly marine aquatic animals, like fish, sea turtles and sea snakes, quite different actually from the Brahminy kite. This striking chestnut brown bird, although it's mostly a scavenger and it eats dead fish and crabs from rocks or the beach, it can also be found flying close to the sea surface looking for small fish. Because of its type of diet, this bird is well tolerated by the sea eagles and the ospreys, because they don't really compete for the food. The osprey is quite a special one. Because of its unique behavior and abilities to hunt and catch prey, it has been given its own taxonomic genus, Pandion, and family, Pandionidae. This animal resides close to coasts and estuaries where there are plenty of opportunities for fishing.
So just here is one of the favourite hunting places for the eagles and the ospreys. As the tide comes in, the fish actually move in here and start feeding, and when these rocks get a little bit more covered, there's enough depth for the fish to actually come in very close, and that's when you see the eagles start to circle. Dead giveaway when the eagles are hunting, because all these birds here will suddenly take off, and then you look up in the sky and there'll be the eagle circling around looking for fish. If he sees fish, then he'll come in lower and he'll actually dive in and pull the fish out.
Just about 15 minutes from Byron Bay are the coastal wetlands of Ballina, a quite unique place to see remarkable bird life.
We're down at Ballina now, on the sand flats of the North Arm Creek. This is an absolute hotspot for birds, and right behind us now, just here, we have a group of pelicans. These are the heaviest flying birds in Australia. And as the old saying is, the wonderful bird is the pelican. Its beak can hold more than its belly can. And the beak with the flap of skin underneath is huge, and they can swallow really big creatures. And they'll have a beak full of water and fish, and then they just sieve through it and get the fish out. They're having a bit of a rest at the moment, which is rather nice to see, but when the tide comes in a bit, they'll probably start fishing.
As the tide was actually coming in, we soon started to be surrounded by water. We quickly had to pick up our stuff and hurry up. But in our way back at the river mouth, we found another special creature, and we couldn't go without first filming it. That was the soldier crab.
On the sand flats around the river mouths, there's a real spectacle to be seen, an amazing sight. There's thousands and thousands of soldier crabs emerging from the sand. This often happens majorly around full moon, and it's something to behold. Thousands and thousands of soldier crabs will start to emerge and march together, feeding. And that's what this is all about, is they're feeding, sifting through the sand, getting any nutrition they can out of it. They're beautiful. This beautiful porcelain blue colour is a really wonderful sight.
After this exciting march, and just before the high tide reached that part of the sandflat, all the trooping crabs started to dig themselves into the sand. We were also lucky to witness the known threat display, where encounters between adult males fighting for the same burrow were happening. Normally, the smaller crabs were the ones who lose the conflict and eventually back down, but in this case clearly this little one wasn't giving up. In one of my journeys to film the local shorebirds of Byron Bay, precisely to the shallow estuary, I met Maggie, a volunteer of a bird organization, who told me about the situation that these local birds are going through.
So this is a pretty special place that we love. It's the Tallow Creek estuary, and it's special because it's a resting place for coastal birds. Some of the challenges we have in looking after this area are to do with the nature of Byron Bay, which is well known as a kind of holiday destination, party place. We've had difficulties over the last 10 years probably. There were a lot of giant parties going on here on the beach, techno parties, which of course, as you know, for our birds and for our wallabies and other animals, that kind of noise and that kind of action in the area, in their environment, is really catastrophic. All those things can really scare them, and these animals are sensitive. You know, they'll go where the conditions are perfect for them, and if things upset them, they won't come back. So we all work pretty hard to keep that going, and we have some great community groups. We have Byron Bird Buddies, and we have water care people at council who try to look after the estuary and look after the environment of the estuary. So it's very beautiful, it's very worth doing, but at times it can be a bit sad that people are not more sensitive to what's going on here, and how really this little place is just a microcosm of what's happening all over the world.
Several are the species affected by the human activity that inhabit the coasts of Byron. The pirate oystercatcher, although having such name, doesn't normally feed from oysters. Instead, it usually eats small bivalve mollusks with its specialized bill. This kind of shorebird is mainly identified for its black and white plumage and its slim pinky legs. It is also considered as endangered in the region of Byron Bay. Filming the beach stone crawler bird was kind of special, as it usually lives far from tourism, away from human and animal disruption. It's one of the world's largest shorebirds, and because it's listed as a near-threatened species, they are keeping an eye on them by tagging the legs with yellow labels. As both species are vulnerable to human disturbance, the community of Byron is trying to protect them by placing informative panels on the beach and surrounding estuaries. But the local shorebirds are not the only ones that may be affected by careless visitors. All along the beaches of Byron Bay, there's a small creature that lives in burrows under the sand. It's the sand bubbler crab.
So here we've got the little patterns in the sand made by the sand bubbler crabs. They're actually little balls of sand, and the sand bubbler lives in a hole right in the middle, and he'll come out and actually start sifting through the sand and finding little particles of algae and little bits of plankton that have been left as the tide has gone out. And he makes these little balls by actually rolling them. It's quite amazing. If you have a look close up on them, they have lots of little feelers here that actually bring the sand up to the mandibles, and then they're actually, you can see the saliva and you can see the legs rolling the balls. Meanwhile, there's more sand coming up, and it's amazing. It's like a little machine, little sand digging machine.
I have never been much of a bird person, but after encountering the parrot species I'm about to show you, I completely changed my mind. The rainbow lorikeet is the most common bird observed in Australia. Its main source of energy are the natural sugars from fruits, pollen and nectar. They can effortlessly extract the nectar from flowers thanks to the finger-like shape of their tongues. One of the chosen trees for roost is the bottlebrush tree. It's believed that they tend to be in large communal roosts to detect and protect themselves from potential predators more easily. The rainbow lorikeets are usually associated with the scaly-breasted lorikeets, an emerald green with yellow scalloping on the front and a coral pink bill parrot. They both can be found in the same canopy of flowering trees. The eastern rosella is another parrot frequently found in urbanized areas. They normally feed on grass and flowers, but in this time of the year, from February to June, and in the southeastern regions of Australia, is breeding season. As they need more protein in their diet, they particularly look for insect larvae to eat. They usually pair for life, and they have an interesting way of courting. They feed each other. Discovering the subtropical rainforest was a truly incredible experience. It was the first time that I was in one, and I would recommend it to anyone. The type of sounds and scents that were surrounding us were just something out of this world. This particular rainforest area that we visit, the Minion Valley, is part of the Nightcap National Park, and unfortunately, because of farmland, it's one of the last patches left of the native Australian forests.
So we're in the eucalypt forest now, just above Minion Falls, and these forests actually developed from rainforest trees. This is going back many millions of years now. When Australia broke away from Antarctica, which was part of the Gondwanan supercontinent, then Australia started to drift north, and it went into now the subtropical zone, like 3,500 kilometres it's travelled over about 55 million years, where the eucalyptus trees have developed from the rainforest trees, and down in the cooler, damper valleys, the old rainforests, the ancient rainforests from Gondwana still survive. So we're actually in the eucalypt forest now, and we're walking down into the rainforest, and that's time travelling. So we're actually going to walk down and go back 55 million years. This is the rainforest plant starting now. These are tree ferns, and these are part of the ancient Gondwanan flora. So we're starting to go back millions and millions of years now. And these tree ferns were around when the dinosaurs were still on the planet. So we're very ancient, and they can grow much taller than this too. They're very slow growing, and they can grow up to 10 or 12 metres. Here's an example of a very old tree that's died, and as you can see, it's all crumbling away here. It's all starting to fall apart, but that's great habitat and great food for a lot of insect species, And of course, where you have insects, then you have other creatures feeding on the insects. So all part of the food chain, but it needs old trees. They're very important. Now we're seeing the palms starting to appear. And these two are very, very ancient. So we're starting to get down towards the rainforest now. And you can feel it's noticeably cooler. The rainforest can be up to 15 degrees cooler than the surrounding eucalypt forests. So they're all part of the planet's air conditioning system. This is a very interesting tree. This is the strangler fig. And this tree starts its life not on the ground like most trees, but it starts its life way up in the top of the canopy. And its seeds are actually eaten by birds and then dropped high up in the canopy, and then they bring down these roots down to the ground. But at the same time, they completely encompass the host tree. And then they eventually strangle it, and the host tree dies. And these strangler figs then end up hollow inside, and they grow on for hundreds of years and get really massive. And they're incredibly strong, but they're hollow because the host tree has rotted away inside, and they're like a big Eiffel Tower. So we're deep in the rainforest now, and it's very, very damp. Everything's dripping, and all the rocks and all the old tree stumps are covered in moss. This is one of the features of the rainforest as well. There's a lot of fungi grow here because it's so damp and so nutrient rich. Here's an old log, and it's got bracket fungi growing on it. And these are just the fruiting bodies of a whole network that is down deeper in the log.
After exploring most of the rainforest and scrambling over wet rocks, we eventually arrived to the end point of our route, the Minion Falls.
We're at the base of the Minion Falls, and these were created by cutting down through a different type of lava that came from the Mount Warning volcano. Mount Warning volcano was one of the largest in the southern hemisphere. It covered 5,000 square kilometres, which is absolutely huge. It actually poured out different types of lava. Some were basaltic, which was quite soft. This is rhyolite, and this is very, very hard. So all around the edges of the volcano, you find waterfalls like this. And the creek at the top here has actually just cut its way down over millions of years.
Although there's a possibility of finding koalas on the eucalypt forests, during our expedition to the rainforest we weren't that lucky. They can also be found all over the woods alongside the roads or in the national parks that surround Byron Bay.
In and around Byron Bay we still do have some koalas, and they're usually up in the eucalypt trees resting, which they do a lot of because the eucalypt leaves have very little energy in them. It's amazing that they can actually survive on them, but since there's so little nutrition in them that the koalas don't do very much. They're probably the sleepiest creature in Australia. So koalas, basically, as marsupials, they have their young carrying around with them for quite a long time. Again, they're very, very slow and they appear very dopey. Yeah, they're a beautiful creature, and we see them down on the grass walking between the trees. But they are prone to traffic. They can be hit by cars, so it's best wherever there are koala habitats, just be very, very careful. They're in trouble because we have so much land clearing going on in Australia. A lot of their eucalypt forest that they depend on is cleared for farmland, and at present it's particularly bad, and there is concern that koalas could become extinct in the wild.
This last chapter ends where it started, at the headland of Cape Byron, and it's about one of the most popular mammals around the southeast coast of Australia, the humpback whale.
So we're at Cape Byron now, and it's quite a well-known spot for whale watching. These whales are coming from Antarctica on a massive migration. They're coming all the way from down south and then up to Queensland, and that's where they'll rest and have their babies and mate and basically have a nice holiday in Queensland. In September they'll be coming back down, so this is a wintertime thing for them. In Antarctica it's far too cold for them, there's too much ice. So what we're looking at is one of the world's greatest migrations. There are over 30,000 humpback whales now. It's one of the great success stories of conservation, is if we leave nature alone, it is quite capable of rebuilding itself. The whales here were reduced to around about 1,000 or 1,300 for the whole East Coast population. So from there, from the 1960s to now, they're back up to over 30,000, which is a remarkable thing.
That remarkable story made me want to learn more about them, and no matter what the weather conditions were, you could find me up there trying to find the perfect spot for filming some of the interesting behaviors. Most of the times, you could see them just traveling, and sometimes even next to dolphins. It is known that in their long journey, they don't really need to feed. They have been feeding on krill and put on a lot of blubber in the Antarctica, enabling them to travel thousands of kilometers. Sometimes though, apart from traveling, you could spot them displaying some incredible acrobatics. We saw them breaching, which is absolutely magnificent. If they were reasonably close, you could see the 15 or 20 meter size of the whales really dramatically, because they leap almost clean out of the water. That was the most spectacular of their behaviors, but they did many others. They sometimes laid on their side and used their pectoral fins, which are like big wings, to slap the water really hard. And actually, with these exhibitions, they demonstrate the origin of its scientific name Megaptera, which means large wing. Other times, you could see them lifting the tails out of the water to smash the sea surface, which is known as lobtailing. And they also performed the spy hopping action, where they use their heads and part of their chests to display vertical movements out of the water. What is this all about? We are not quite sure, but recent studies have discovered that it might be related to communication techniques. Apparently, by slamming their massive bodies into the water, the resultant sounds can travel huge distances, arriving to other whales far in the distance. Usually, you could see them traveling in groups of 2 and 3, and quite often you could see an adult, and quite often female, bringing a calf with her, probably with the calf of last year or the year before, bringing them up here from the cold waters of Antarctica. They have become so popular that sometimes up in the Cape, every day hundreds of people gather just to watch them. Back in the days when Byron was a whaling center, it would have been hard to imagine that in the future people would be paying considerable amounts of money to go out in boats and watch whales.
With this documentary, I want to emphasize the importance of conservation. At the time when settlement first started, the new industries coming along like tourism could never have been envisaged. And that's the interesting bit about conserving, because we don't know which new technologies are going to come up in the future. We don't know which new industries are going to spring up in the future. But what we do know is that we need a healthy environment, and that the planet itself, it thrives on biodiversity. It thrives on big populations of creatures. And we've just got to be very careful, because we are part of that whole system. We are animals, and we rely on the environment just as all the species rely on the environment. And if at some point that environment gets damaged and the wildlife starts to suffer, that's an alarm bell for us, because we will be the next species to suffer, because we rely on the same things that all the wildlife relies on. And it's just a matter of time before we experience the same stresses that the wildlife is feeling. Byron Bay is just an example of how a local community is developing its business and living projects, all being careful of not harming the wildlife inhabiting the national parks. Maybe it's time for the rest of the world to follow that example and start doing the same.